Mayor Bill de Blasio, he's dealing with both state and federal investigations into campaign fundraising and pay-for-play allegations. He's also getting ready to gear up for his re-election campaign this fall. Well, earlier today, our own Dominic sat down with Brian Lehrer, the man who sits down with the mayor every week on his WNYC radio program.
Brian Lehrer, thank you for joining us on this Friday night.
Thanks for having me, Dominic.
Brian, you host a weekly call-in show with Mayor de Blasio. And the mayor, Mayor de Blasio, is going in to talk to federal prosecutors, the Office of Preet Bharara, without, Brian, the protection of immunity. Why in the world would Mayor de Blasio do that?
Well, if he's the one under investigation, or if he's one of the ones, plus members of his team, under investigation, they wouldn't give him immunity. If he's the big fish, now I don't know what's going on in the U.S. Attorney's mind, but this is my speculation, that in general, if you're the big fish, then you're not going to be given immunity. They usually give immunity to people who are lower down who might give up the big fish. This is not to say he's going to be indicted, but I imagine that he could not have gotten immunity and that he thinks that he can make a persuasive case to the U.S. Attorney that what he and presumably other members of his team, assume he wouldn't sell them out, so presumably he's arguing that he and other members of his team, same thing he's told me on the phone week after week when this comes up, consulted with lawyers every step of the way when they did their campaign fundraising and when they did their fundraising for their issues group, the Campaign for One New York, that it was all done with legal guidance. And so he's probably going to walk the U.S. Attorney through step by step of what they did and the law as it was explained to them and why no crimes were committed.
But Brian, isn't it risky, very risky, to talk to federal prosecutors again without the protection of immunity?
Sure. And we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So there are various scenarios. Maybe he's getting indications that he's going to be indicted and feels the last-ditch effort is to make his case. I have no indication of that, but that could be one scenario. Or maybe he doesn't know and he's in the dark and he's hearing bits and pieces of what the grand jury has been hearing and feels like he can make the best case himself to the prosecutor's office that no crime was committed. You have to take some risks sometimes if you feel you've got the goods. The chances are strong that he feels he can speak the truth without incriminating himself. If you're asking me about why with no immunity, isn't that a risk? He must feel that what he can say does not incriminate himself so he can go and testify.
Now, this all comes, Brian, in the wake of de Blasio also being questioned by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, which is conducting a separate probe into his fundraising practices in 2014 for the state Senate races.
Yeah, and again, I don't know. I'm not privy to anything that's going on in either prosecutor's office. I know there have been some reports that the Manhattan DA is not really focusing on de Blasio himself. So again, there would be some reason for him to feel safe in talking to Cy Vance if he thinks that that's the case. Maybe he's trying to save some members of his team from prosecution if he knows he's already safe and feels he can make a strong case. I don't know. I admit I'm just completely speculating here. But those are some scenarios under which he might feel that he's got the goods, he's persuasive, he can say why nobody or the fewest number of people should be indicted.
Brian, de Blasio has insisted the probes are a huge waste of time and money because everything his administration has done has been, in the mayor's words, above board.
Well, you got to say that if you are going to try to save your bacon, whether you're guilty or not of something. Presumably, until you're indicted, you're going to say no crime was committed. So I don't take that as very meaningful one way or another. I think that's pretty boilerplate what somebody's going to say until and when and if they get to that point. I will note that in the mayor's preliminary budget for the next fiscal year that came out last week, there is $11 million for lawyers' fees that weren't in last year, that budget watchers are taking as an indication that somebody's going to have to be defended. Maybe that's money that's already being spent, prior to indictment, and there'll be maybe no indictment, but it is possible that people are going to be indicted, so they're allocating money, and waste of time and money, we'll find out, but yes, there is public money being spent.
This is an election year, Brian. Does this make Mayor de Blasio vulnerable?
Very vulnerable, depending on what the DA and the U.S. Attorney decide. They could clear him, and then it gives him a fresh wind toward re-election. Or obviously they could indict him personally, and then he's in huge trouble. I think the major politicians who would be his biggest competition, mostly Democrats, are sitting it out so far and not announcing that they're going to run in a Democratic primary until they know what the lay of the land is. If you're running against somebody who is just cleared, or if you're running against somebody who is indicted, or if some of his major hires were indicted, then, those are two very different scenarios. So I think we just don't know yet what the politics are. What I hope is that both prosecutors, state and federal, say something definitive. Preparara did it with Cuomo. He did that investigation, and he made a public announcement that the case was being closed and no charges, unless something really new were to surface, would be brought against Andrew Cuomo. If he does the same thing for de Blasio, it would be a public service so that people could focus on the issues, that you and I in the media and the public at large could focus on the issues of importance to the city, housing and crime and everything else, rather than spending a lot of time speculating whether an indictment will come eventually down the road because he just doesn't say anything. I think that would be a real public service. So I would hope that there will be either an indictment or a statement that there is nothing to indict him for.
Brian Lehrer, WNYC Radio, we thank you for joining us again on this Friday night.
My pleasure, Dominic.
Thank you, Dominic. Coming up next, the Super Bowl commercials get almost as much buzz as the actual game. Well, someone from Adweek will join us to take a look at the ones that are hot and the ones that are raising a lot of questions.